There are 3 phases in Planetary Reign, with each phase being broken down into 3 steps. Phase 1 and 2 are simple and quick upkeep phases. Phase 3 is where all of the action and scoring takes place and is the heart of the game. Okay, let's start with Phase 1. The first thing we do is a year step. Take a year marker from the face down pile and place it face up on the next available space on the year track. Next is the gateway step. In this step, players simply flip gateway tiles so that they correspond to what is showing on the year marker just drawn. The last step of this phase is the initiative step, in which the initiative marker is passed on to the next player in clockwise order. Now on to Phase 2. First up is the census step, in which each empire determines its total population by counting the number of workers on its empire panel and on the galaxy board. Players can use status tracks to speed up the counting process. Next is the sustain step. In this step, each empire refers its total population to the sustain chart to determine how many organics it will require to sustain its population for the current year. Lastly, we have the growth step, in which each player simply refers to the culture track to determine how many new workers it will receive from its supply. And now on to Phase 3, which is the final and most important phase of the game. The first step is the action step, and as mentioned is the heart of the game. The player with the initiative marker performs the first action, and then all other players in clockwise order get to perform an action. Now, at this point, I would like to briefly explain how actions are performed and their effects on the game. Let me start by saying that each player starts the game with a number of workers and resources in their reserves. Players can assign their workers and reserves to any of the 8 actions on their empire panel. Once acquired, species may also be assigned to actions. Each of the worker symbols displayed within an action area requires 1 worker or species cube, and each of the resource symbols requires a matching resource cube. So let's go through each of the actions, starting with the Explore action. Explore actions allow players to move fleets around the galaxy and to send probes in search of discoveries. To move a fleet, a player must assign a worker or species to one of the movement symbols. Each worker or species placed on a movement symbol allows a single fleet to move its movement allowance. The number of flames on a fleet disk determines how many spaces it may move on the board. Players may also simultaneously assign a fuel cube to the hyper symbol in order to hyperjump a fleet. Lastly, players may assign a worker or species to the probe symbol in order to pick up a discovery marker located up to 2 spaces away from the fleet. Next is the Populate action. Players perform this action to colonise and populate planets. Colonising and populating a planet allows an empire to mine its resources, to install structures, and to increase its population in a sector. Players simply move a worker from their reserves to a planet. If the environment of the planet does not match an empire's homeworld, a worker or species must be assigned to the alien environment symbol. If the planet is inhabited by an alien species, you may move one of the species cubes from the planet to its associated holding bay. Players may also abandon a planet by assigning a worker or species to the abandon symbol and then moving 1 worker cube from any planet they control to their reserves. Next is the Mine action. Players perform this action to mine resources from planets they control. Players assign a worker or species to one of the sector symbols and then move a resource from any planet in the matching sector to their reserves. Players may also assign a worker or species to the strip mine symbol to move a second resource from any planet to their reserves. Next is the Build action. Players perform this action to build and upgrade fleets. To build a fleet, players assign a worker or species to the build symbol, as well as a number of metal cubes to the resource symbols. The number of metal required is determined by referencing the technology level numbers above the resource symbols. Players may only build fleets matching with or lower than their current technology levels. Once costs have been met, place the newly built fleet disk onto the reserves area of your Empire panel. Players may also upgrade fleets. Please see the rulebook for more information on upgrading fleets versus building fleets. Now to the first action on the right-hand side, which is the technology action. Players perform this action to advance their Empire's technology levels or to synthesise a resource. Players assign 3 workers or species to the research symbols to advance their marker on the technology track. Alternatively, players may assign 2 workers or species to the synthesise symbols to gain 1 resource of any type. The next action is the government action. Players perform a government action to advance their Empire's culture levels or to recruit additional workers. Players assign 3 workers or species to the culture symbols to advance their marker on the culture track. Alternatively, players may assign 2 workers or species to the recruit symbols to gain 1 worker. Next is the military action. Players perform this action to enhance the strength of their fleets and planets. When players assign 2 workers or species to the attack symbols, each of their fleets will gain 1 point of strength for the duration of that year. When players assign a worker or species to the defence symbol, each of their planets gains 1 point of strength for the duration of that year. And lastly, we have the structure action, which can only be performed when playing an advanced game. Players assign a worker or species to the install symbol and any required resources to the resource symbols. The number of resources required is determined by a structure's population requirement. Once all costs have been met, players activate a structure module by flipping it and then placing the matching structure tile onto the relevant planet. So that's the end of the action step. Next is the reset step. In the reset step, players simply move all assigned workers and assigned species to the reserve areas of their Empire panels. Workers in the reserve area are now ready to be assigned to actions in the following year. Any species cubes that were assigned to actions and moved to the reserve area may now undergo trained assimilation. Trained assimilation allows a player to convert 3 species cubes into 2 workers. Species cubes that were not assigned to actions remain in their holding bays till the following year, or may undergo an untrained assimilation at any time during a player's turn. Untrained assimilation allows a player to convert 2 species cubes into 1 worker. Now for the final step, the status step. This step takes place at designated intervals in the game, as marked on the year track. During this step, players will earn points for domination, tributes, armadas and structures. Players begin by awarding points for domination. The player with initiative goes first at scoring points for each sector, and then all other players follow in clockwise order. An empire's population in each sector determines the number of points received. Players with the most or tie for the most population receive the highest number of points. Players with the second most or tie for second most receive the middle number of points, and so on. Players can easily determine their populations in each of the sectors by looking at their positions on the sector tracks. Players adjust their positions on the status track to reflect the points that they have been awarded. Next, players may tribute some or all of their resources to the Galactic Bank in exchange for points. Then players gain points for their armadas, which is the number of flames on all fleet discs on the board. And lastly, players earn points for the number of structures they have built. To finish off, I would like to provide a quick explanation of how battles work in the game. There are 2 types of battles: fleet-to-fleet battles and fleet-to-planet battles. Both types of battles are resolved in a similar manner. Each attacking or defending fleet deals damage to its opponent. A fleet strength is determined by the number of ships depicted on the disc, while a planet's strength is determined by the number of workers it contains. To reflect damage done to a planet, remove one worker for each point of damage. To reflect damage done to a fleet, downgrade the ship one technology level for each point of damage. Simply flip or exchange a fleet disc with those in your supply. Okay, so hopefully that should provide a fair understanding of the game and its workings. For further information, please download the rulebook. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the game.